We're kind of in the middle of a famous Bible stories mini-series in the lectionary right now. Last week we had the parable of the Good Samaritan. This week it's Martha and Mary, and next week we'll be hearing Jesus teach the Lord's Prayer. I know, right? For this week's famous Bible story, I wanted to take a look at not the assumptions necessarily, though that'll be part of it, but the points that we expect will be talked about. Address some of them and sort of maybe even pull them apart a little bit. Because I think there are things that are expected, or at least I feel are expected, to be talked about or addressed in some way when this particular passage comes up in the lectionary. And just to let you know what I mean, these things, or at least the ones that we'll look at today, are the who do you identify with or relate to, the question or the idea that you are either a Martha or a Mary, the theme of hospitality and people's roles in society, and maybe a little bit of a challenge to that. And then the question of who is right or better, the idea that like Mary chose better and Martha needs to learn, and maybe a little bit of a challenge to that as well. There are probably many more items that we could list, but this is at least a start to some of the ideas that I think have come to be the things we expect to hear about or talk about when this passage comes up in the lectionary. So yeah, let's talk about them. Item 1, you are either a Martha or a Mary, meaning you are either a doer or a thinker, a server or a student. Look, I love a good which TV or movie character are you quiz as much as the next person. But in this case, it really does limit these people, Mary and Martha, and us too, if we start reading ourselves into the story here. It limits us to a fairly flat, kind of two-dimensional existence. While we may have a tendency or preference to be active or contemplative when living out our faith, we should be sure to note that this is one moment on one day of these people's whole lives. So tendencies may be there, and we might relate more to one or the other in this scenario, but we should also proceed with caution and be careful of taking it too far to the point where we dismiss them, right? Kind of the rest of their whole lives, and their depth as people, not reducing them to like this one particular conversation. So for this point, I'm going to suggest that you can learn from them in this moment. We all can learn from them in this moment. But whether you're one or the other and exactly what that means maybe needs to be redirected a little bit, because they are them and you are you. Item 2, hospitality considerations. Jesus visits, so hospitality is going to be expected or customary, and so we're going to talk about that. There would be a high level of importance put on hospitality in this setting, and pretty specific ideas about what that means, what it is to be hospitable, to offer a seat to your guest, a place to sit down, refreshments, a snack, a meal, probably all those things and more. What is it for us today, hospitality? Probably fairly similar. It is important to remember, though, that the level of importance on this, in this context, would be extremely high. The honor of welcoming someone into your home is a big deal. And even more so when it's someone of the level of importance of Jesus himself. So it's not out of line at all that Martha is doing all of these things and wants some help from her sister as her co-host. That's maybe the definition of hospitality, the expectation, but let's take that a little bit further, kind of pull it apart a little bit. What's the point of it? The point of hospitality? The point is the visit, right? The guest, the visitor, welcoming them. Jesus is there. And there is need of only one thing now, to visit with him, to be present with your guest. Jesus says that Mary chose well, and her choice is not going to be taken from her. She is at Jesus' feet, listening to him as a student, as a disciple would. Mary's place is actually where she chooses to be, and her choice won't be taken away. Speaking of choices, the next item. Mary chose better. Mary is better. Martha needs to change. Okay, this one's going to take something to talk about. It's a little bit of an assumption or a conclusion that can come from certain ways of reading this text. But let's first take a look at that text itself. When and why does Jesus say Mary has chosen the better part? After Martha complains and asks him about having to do all the work herself. The thing is, they're not in a competition. We need to stop setting them up against each other, right? Mary's choice doesn't necessarily mean that Martha's isn't valid, right? Jesus doesn't say to Martha, go sit down with Mary, right? But rather that Mary's choice will not be taken away from her. My favorite extracurricular to be part of in high school was speech or forensics. And I'll tell you a little bit about it. We would get up and get on a bus around or before, usually something like 5 a.m, to drive a few hours to the hosting school for our Saturday tournaments. Unless we were hosting, then it was only like 7:30, 8 o'clock or so. And then the day began. You went to rounds in your category and performed a prepared poem or excerpt from a play or book, and then returned to your school's sort of like campsite, which was usually in like the gymnasium or a common area. This is just the place where everybody from your school put all their stuff for the day. And then winners from these rounds would advance to finals, and there was an award ceremony for those who placed at the end of the day. And while placing, getting first or second or whatever, or making it to finals was great, it's the days themselves that I think had the more lasting impact. Because in most competitions or tournaments, who wishes you good luck? Your teammates, people from your school or your town. Exactly. And why do they do that? They want you to win, right? As part of your team, or their team, part of their team, or part of their school or town. They want you to beat the other teams, the other people, and win. At these meets, at these tournaments, everyone wished you good luck. Everyone. People directly competing against you in your round would tell you how well you did at the end of it. Didn't matter what school you were from or they were from. And you got to tell that to other people too. It was the most supportive, non-competitive competition I've ever had the privilege of being part of. It really made you try to be your best and work to be better, to improve. But other people's accomplishments, other people's best didn't diminish yours, and vice versa. You just celebrated with each other all your achievements. Jesus doesn't speak up until Martha makes it me versus her. And then he really just speaks to her anxiousness more than anything. It's the worry and the distraction that's the concern. Not a competitive competition. Mary doesn't need to change who she is. But maybe Martha doesn't either? Okay. Well, we made it. I'm sure there are expectations I missed. And there'll be more to be addressed next time this text comes around in the lectionary. But maybe that's enough to think about for this week. So what do we take from this? Maybe a little more of an understanding of the wider picture of the people in the story itself. Maybe a little more of an understanding of our own world, our assumptions and biases that can be addressed and learned from. maybe a little bit more of an understanding of how things could be if we supported and celebrated who each of us uniquely is, and acknowledged the wonder and goodness of the life each of us gets to live as we find and claim our best and most authentic selves. As I suggested earlier, you are you. So be you. Welcome, visit, prepare, work, rest, listen, speak, learn, invite. Be frustrated, be patient. Set aside your distractions and be you. Celebrate the person that is you and the person that is your sister, your brother, your sibling, your friend, your neighbor. Jesus is here. There is need of only one thing now. Amen.